aside for now. Women and firearms in general. Saga is very big, as a passion for trying to get ladies involved in the industry. It's a male-dominated industry. How do you feel about lady shooters, women shooters, and do you think that there is an alternative way to deal with lady shooters? My experience is that all the lady shooters that I know, that are relatively few, are exceptional shooters. But to get ladies or women to that level, is there any comment you could make with regard to that specifically?
Sure. Okay, so I've been in the firearms industry from the early 80s, and we have had ladies come through the sport of shooting, the old RPSC days. In Durban here we used to have a club called DVC, and we started shooting at Durban Combat Pistol Club. We had a couple of ladies come through. Very few of them actually stay in the industry. It's a male-dominated industry. Let's not beat around the bush. It's a male-dominated industry. So we don't have many ladies coming into the industry and staying. Very few of them do. It's a pity. But one of the things that we do need to look at is that when the ladies do come into the industry, we need to be more welcoming to the fairer sex. We are, as men, usually wearing all the guns and all the gear, and we can be somewhat intimidating to new ladies. It's funny you should mention that. I've just come down from a talk to 14 ladies that are doing a program just here at the shooting range, and this was one of the questions, is how do they get into the industry that's male dominated? And they've got to do it for themselves. There are other organizations out there that have ladies involved in the shooting unit. One of the problems we have is we don't have enough range officers or instructors coming through the system, as I'm referring to ladies. Some ladies prefer to come and be trained by a woman on the shooting range. They don't want some bloke standing there with a big beard and a heavy voice. They would prefer being taught by a lady. And we haven't had instructors or range officers stay in the program because, let's face it, this is a calling, being involved in firearms training. You certainly don't make a full-time living out of it here in South Africa. And it just isn't enough business for them in the industry, and that's possibly why we don't have them staying. So that is possibly one of the things that we could look at is being more open to them, have more Women's Day events and try and coerce them, and especially the wives. We should be looking at the wives, the sisters, the daughters, bringing them into the industry.
Now that makes a lot of sense, and I think that part of the reason we asked that question is that the Saga Ladies events are so successful, and all of the ladies go away saying, when can we do it again? Yet the opportunity is there. They just don't seem to rally to it unless it's ladies only, or a start of ladies only. So I think you've sort of clarified that very nicely. If we can now come back possibly to something that's been touched on in some of the other questions, this concept of the three fights: the first fight, the second fight, the third fight, sometimes called left of bang, center of bang, and right of bang, which I think is a very important concept. It also ties into a question I wanted to come to with regard to non-shooting related skills that are crucial, and you're a big supporter of that, in a shooting discipline. What would your comment be in terms of giving some clarity of what this first, second, and third fight actually means?
Okay, so I am a big proponent of understanding the difference between being a first responder and an immediate responder, Shaun. You've heard me talk about this on courses. An immediate responder is somebody who's possibly been involved in the actual event, who's going to now have to provide follow-up assistance at the event. It could be medical, it could be a number of different things. So understanding all the additional pieces of information, not just the firing of the gun, is extremely important. I believe that it's key. So let's just look at the three fights. The three fights can be broken down into what happens before the actual event. That's being said, it's the precursor, it's the pre-fight indicators. I mean, you can be the most highly trained, motivated individual on the planet, but if you are not aware of what's going on around you, you're going to find yourself submersed into an event. You're not going to be going into that event with your eyes open. You're going to be caught on the back foot, and that's what's often said. People will contact me and they'll tell me they were involved in an event and they felt almost that they were caught on the back foot because they weren't aware of what was going on around them. So being
by
aware,
surprise.
Yes, they're caught off by surprise. Remember that the people that are attacking us are not going to attack us when we are ready. They're probably going to use tactics and techniques used by the shark, which they are ambush creatures by nature. They will look for your most vulnerable time to be attacked. So there's definitely that. But getting back to the 3 fights, the first fight is everything that takes place, and it can be referred to as left to bang. There's a book that I obviously suggest that everybody read about that, and that's the pre-fight indicators, the precursor to the fight, and that includes being aware. And sometimes this can be misconstrued. There are awareness programs out there. I was in the United Kingdom. I was trained by a chap called Steve Collins, who runs a program called React and Reactor, and that is a total awareness package. Very nice, very easy to learn. Unfortunately, sometimes Colonel Jeff Cooper's color codes can be misconstrued as being awareness. It should actually be looked at as being preparedness. So it's sometimes taken out of context by the learners. But yes, definitely understanding what happens before the fight. Then, of course, second fight is what we train for. That's going to the gym and learning how to hit, knowing what it's like to be hit, because a lot of events are not going to allow you to be able to get to your weapon system immediately. You might have to fight somebody to gain access to your weapon system, and I refer to that in training as your close entanglement. Okay. Then that second fight is where a lot of us put in a lot of our energy. That's where we go to the shooting range. We put in the time and learn how to be able to access our firearm within realistic times and deliver accurate shots within a reasonable speed on target.
Okay.
Then, of course, we got the third fight. This is the one where virtually no one trains. They don't go and research this. This is the aftermath. This is, well, we've used the firearm. There's either loss to life or serious injury that's taken place. What happens at the last pull of the trigger and the last cartridge casing hitting the floor? What takes place now? What happens in terms of the legal ramifications? What happens when the police pitch up on the scene? I often see so much talk about, will the police get to the scene and can they demand a statement from you? Yes, they can. No, they can't. And we argue around and around. Same as the 45 versus the 9mm cartridge argument.
Okay.
We're never going to put it to rest unless you've actually been through that event and understood the processes. And that's why I get back to the choosing of a trainer, the lineage. You will understand then what the processes are, and you can guide people through the process. But that segment, that third fight, is extremely important. That's the hospital bills. How much it costs to employ a good lawyer. You're involved in the legal fraternity, and you know you get lawyers and you get lawyers. Some lawyers are best suited for some subjects of law, and others are best suited for other subjects of law. So the correct choice of who you're going to get to represent you in court is quite important. And then, of course, the construction of statements. How far do the statements go? Does it go to the public prosecutor's pool where a decision is made not to prosecute, and that's first prize, based upon what was in your statement and other statements that were taken and investigated by the police services.
Okay, so that'll actually cycle back, correct me if I'm wrong, back to the comment about the shooter that says, I'm proficient, I'm competent, I've got a firearms license. Because surely that person then would have no knowledge of the fight number 1, the fight number 2, never been there, and certainly not fight number 3, which means that they would need to upskill through all of those 3 fights. Would that be a fair comment?
I would say that they would need to upskill themselves in certainly the first and the third fight.
Okay.
Maybe the second fight they would have covered to a certain degree on a unit standard-based course.
Okay.
And not to detract, we've got people out there that offer really good unit standard-based training. And I would obviously, as I've said, encourage them to do that. In fact, I don't take anyone on any of my training unless they have completed the unit standard-based training. So that's kind of where I go. But in terms of that first, second, and third fight, certainly having an understanding of what the processes are, and then also keeping up to date, Shaun, in terms of decided cases. Shootings are taking place all the time, not only by law enforcement and by security professionals, by security practitioners. Civilians are getting involved in shootings, and those become decided cases, and those steer and guide case law in South Africa. So understanding that the written law that you learn to get your proficiency certificate is not case law. So maybe once a year, attending a course with someone that presents this type of training would be certainly beneficial.
Okay, that's perfect. That leads us on to something that you've spoken a lot about, some of the detail of what you've just said in that particular question. Concepts like the OODA loop, situational awareness, you've mentioned something about the legality, the need possibly for some form of first response, medical first response, and then the concept that I think most people miss, what you referred to as the parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous switch. In other words, the psychology of the body, which people may know as fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
Can you talk maybe a little bit about those concepts? Because I think that deals in detail with what you've just addressed.
Okay, so we've touched on the awareness. I won't rehash that, but let's look at the OODA loop. Okay, observe, orientate, and decide and act. That's an in-fight strategy that's employed. It's also known as Boyd's cycle, and we use that in some instances without even knowing a hell of a lot about it in stand-up or grappling techniques. It's only of late that it's been used in the firearms industry. Overseas it has been used for some time in the firearms industry. Sometimes taken out of context, but it is employed in the firearms industry. But one of the biggest areas that I would like to bring to the fold is that when we talk about the parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous system switch and the byproducts, both positive and negative, you need to include that in your training regime.
Okay.
The reason being is that sometimes the body will not do what you're expecting it to do. So your training techniques have to include the byproducts from the parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous system switch, such as, for example, auditory exclusion. Okay. Such as, for example, your eyesight being the most dominant of all your senses. That is responsible for receiving the information so you can make a decision. I think that in South Africa, this area of training is neglected. I think it needs to be included in any form of training where you could possibly be forced to have to use force against another person, or persons, depending on how many there are, because at the moment now we know the statistics of that you could possibly be attacked by more than one individual. Okay. So the inclusion of the parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous system almost needs to be dovetailed into the practical aspects of training, and most certainly included in the theoretical component.
Okay. For those that aren't familiar with the concept parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous system switch, could we maybe just clarify a little bit? Would it be fair to say, for example, that it's a hardwired psychological neuro network that the body is going to walk down whether you have awareness of it or not? In other words, it's going to happen automatically. Would that be fair? How does that feed into...
It's exactly that. Your body is going to go through a decision-making process, and based upon your life's experiences, the level of training that you've had. For example, one of the areas that I like to dive into with training is scenario-based training that includes force on force. That's why I invested so heavily on T4E, training sim guns. They cost a fortune, but what we are able to do is we're able to submerge somebody into that situation whereby they get to experience a little bit of that parasympathetic to sympathetic nervous system switch.
Could you clarify, what the T4 force on force means for someone who's never heard of it? What does it actually mean?
T4E is a firearm, licensed firearm by the top branded manufacturers such as Glock. I'm obviously a big Glock supporter, where the pistol, and in some cases rifle, predominantly AR platform rifles, are built that you can use the weapon system against another person in a simulated event, where we get to shoot at each other. All too often, we're on the range today, we're shooting at old RPSC or ST1 targets. The target is static, Shaun, it's not shooting back. You can see where the holes are landing. You've been in training with me where we then cover the target with a t-shirt, but the target's still not moving. But training should get to a point where we are actually undergoing simulated exercises that could replicate an everyday event that you could find yourself in.